Inside the Sistine Chapel lies what is probably the most terrifying painting in the entire Vatican. In this gigantic mural, painted by Michelangelo nearly 500 years ago, hundreds of naked bodies fall into the abyss. Angels and demons battle for souls, dragging bodies into hell, while at the center, a divine figure judges humanity's fate without compassion. The image was so shocking in its time that the Vatican itself tried to censor it completely. Only a few years ago, researchers discovered that among these terrifying figures, one might actually be Michelangelo himself, portrayed as a flayed skin. In this video, I am going to tell you everything they do not explain when you visit this painting, the secrets it hides, what they try to cover up, and why it remains the most terrifying painting in the Vatican. Before we can understand why this painting is so disturbing, we need to know why Michelangelo painted it. At the beginning of the 16th century, the church was going through one of its darkest moments. The Protestant Reformation was dividing Europe. The Pope's authority was being questioned, and Rome had just endured a brutal sack that left the city completely humiliated. In the midst of that crisis, Pope Clement VII decided he wanted something monumental, visible, and final inside the Sistine Chapel. His idea was to place a vision of the end of the world, painted by the greatest artist they had, right at the heart of the Vatican. When Clement died, the project did not disappear. His successor, Pope Paul III, picked it up almost immediately and turned it into an official commission. That is how Michelangelo, who had painted the ceiling of the chapel 25 years earlier, found himself returning to the same space, this time to cover the entire altar wall with a colossal mural nearly 14 meters high and 12 meters wide. The Last Judgment was a very common theme in medieval and Renaissance churches. It always served as a visual reminder of what, according to Christian tradition, would happen at the end of time, when Christ would return to judge all of humanity. Normally, this theme was not placed on the altar wall. The usual location was the back of the church above the doors, so that the faithful would see it as they left and carry that terrifying image home with them. Michelangelo did the opposite. He painted his Last Judgment at the very heart of the Sistine Chapel, on the eastern wall above the main altar. It is presented in the most direct, frontal, and intimidating way possible. To create this work, Michelangelo drew on the Western iconographic tradition. By that time, there were already many established models, such as the great altarpieces by Fra Angelico, Hans Memling, and even the chaotic visions of Bosch that we have already analyzed here on the channel. Michelangelo reinterpreted everything from scratch, although he kept the classic structure used by earlier artists. At the top is Christ surrounded by saints and angels. Below, the dead rise on the left, and the damned fall toward hell on the right. In the center is the moment of judgment, where eternal destiny is decided, but here we find a difference. In other versions, the saints are usually arranged in a very orderly way, almost like a celestial court. Michelangelo broke with that tradition. He transformed the entire scene into a vortex of movement, as if the whole wall were rotating on its axis. Those who ascend appear lifted by an invisible force, those who fall are dragged by demons, and those awaiting judgment are tense, twisted, full of contained energy. His inspiration for painting the work this way came from three very clear sources. First, the biblical accounts, especially the Gospel of Matthew and the Book of Revelation, which describe the resurrection of the dead and the final judgment. Second, earlier artistic tradition, from which he took the general composition but adapted it to his monumental style. And finally, his lifelong obsession with the human body, since we must remember that Michelangelo dedicated most of his life to sculpture. That is why his figures, whether angels, saints, or the damned, appear so muscular and so intensely human. To understand the Last Judgment, the best approach is to read it from top to bottom. Michelangelo placed almost 400 figures on this wall, and all of them are part of a huge circular movement that revolves around the central figure. At the very top, in the celestial zone, we see angels carrying the so-called instruments of the Passion. Among them, we can see the angels holding a gigantic cross, the column where Christ was scourged, the crown of thorns, and the Roman soldier's spear. These angels have no wings. They have athletic bodies, like trained athletes carrying the physical reminders of the sacrifice that defined the fate of humanity. Normally, in other versions of the Last Judgment, this upper section is calm and orderly, but not here. Everyone appears tense, leaning, and turning toward the center as if the space itself were moving. A little further down, at the epicenter, we find Christ. Michelangelo depicts him as a classical god, beardless, and with a body reminiscent of Hercules or the Apollo Belvedere. His raised hand is not an aggressive gesture, but a traditional one called ostentatio vulnerum. As he lifts his arm, he reveals the wounds of the Passion before pronouncing judgment. His gaze is directed at the damned, letting us know that this is the exact moment of the verdict. At his right is Mary, but here she does not intercede. Michelangelo paints her withdrawn, with her head slightly bowed and her body turned, as if accepting that she can no longer do anything for anyone. In medieval versions of the Last Judgment, Mary usually defends the souls. Here, she no longer does. Surrounding Christ is a whirlwind of saints and the blessed. To his left is a towering John the Baptist standing firm. To the right is St. Peter holding the keys of heaven. Some believe he is handing them back to Christ because he will no longer need them. All the saints display the instruments of their martyrdom, not to show them off, but perhaps to remind the central figure of their suffering, almost as if they themselves were unsure of their destiny. In other classic versions, these saints appear calm. In Michelangelo's version, even they seem nervous, tense, and almost distressed, as if they too were awaiting their own sentence. Moving a bit lower, we find the angels of the apocalypse. They are the ones blowing the trumpets that awaken the dead. Others hold two enormous books, one containing the names of the saved and the other the names of the condemned. And this is where we see one of the most dramatic figures in the entire painting, a man who realizes in that instant that he is damned. His expression is absolute horror. Two demons grab him and push him downward as he covers his face with one hand. And now we reach the level of humanity. At the bottom left, the dead rise. Some emerge from their graves, others regain their bodies little by little, as if collecting flesh and bone after centuries. Angels help them ascend. It is the most hopeful part of the fresco, but crossing to the right side changes everything. At the bottom right is the chaos of the damned. Here Michelangelo took direct inspiration from Dante's Inferno. Bodies twist while demons, strangely human in appearance, drag them downward. Nothing is cartoonish. Everything feels disturbingly real. In this hell, we find Charon, the mythological ferryman who transports souls to the underworld. He is furious, raising his oar to strike the newly arrived, exactly as described in the Divine Comedy. And next to him is Minos, the infernal judge. He has donkey ears, a serpent coiled around his legs, and most notably, the face of Cardinal Biagio da Cesena. Michelangelo gave him this face because the cardinal had criticized the painting, saying that so much nudity was inappropriate for the Sistine Chapel and more suitable for a brothel. Michelangelo responded silently by placing him in hell with no chance of escape. The entire mural works like a spiral. At the top, the instruments of sacrifice, at the center, the judgment, on the left, the ascent, and on the right, the condemnation. But as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, we cannot ignore a detail that was discovered only recently. Saint Bartholomew is holding in one hand the flayed skin of a man, and it bears a striking resemblance to Michelangelo himself. But before we continue, if like me, you considered this painting a masterpiece and would love to have it hanging in your home, you can now get it on our website. There you can purchase it and add it to your collection, and just like in the video you are watching, with our reproductions you can turn your home into your own personal museum. By buying from the store, you will also be supporting the channel, which allows me to keep creating more videos like this. Worldwide shipping is free. I will leave the link in the description. A few years ago, several scholars began to notice something strange in this mural. The face on the flayed skin held by Saint Bartholomew does not look like him. It looks like Michelangelo. According to Christian tradition, this was the way Saint Bartholomew died. It is said that he was skinned alive as martyrdom, which is why he is always depicted carrying his own flesh in his hand. Logically, the face on that skin should be his, but that is not what happens here. The face does not resemble Bartholomew, it resembles Michelangelo. For years now, experts have confirmed what is almost universally accepted today. Michelangelo portrayed himself as a flayed skin, without a body, without form, completely drained. It was a revelation that changed the way many people read the fresco. And the question is, why? Some believe it is an intimate confession, almost a spiritual release. Michelangelo, already in his 60s when he painted this, was physically and emotionally exhausted. The Vatican pressured him, critics attacked him, and he himself wrote that he felt old, sinful, and tired. Placing his own face on an empty piece of skin could be a brutal way of showing himself as someone who has nothing left to hide before divine judgment. Others believe it was his way of reminding viewers, and perhaps himself, that even the most admired artist in Rome stood at the same level as everyone else, vulnerable, fragile, and fully aware of his destiny. What is certain is that out of all the details in the mural, this is the only one where Michelangelo allowed himself to appear, and not as a hero, not as the genius who painted the entire wall, but as a bodiless skin on the verge of being judged. I would love to read your opinion about this in the comments. Do you think this flayed skin is truly a self-portrait of Michelangelo, or is it a modern interpretation after more than 5 centuries of looking at this painting? Thank you for staying until the end, and I will see you in the next video.